Welcome to Firearms Friday from the Wyoming State Museum here in Cheyenne. I'm Evan Green. I'm the firearms historian for the Wyoming State Museum. And since I've about finished going through the 300 firearms in the permanent collection, the staff has asked me to move on and take a look at the edged weapons in the collection. So we're going to do some videos on swords and bayonets and trench knives. And what we have here are the officer's swords, the model of 1902. And this particular model, developed in 1902, is still the standard sword for officers in the United States military today. Obviously, swords have not been a thing in combat for many, many years, so it is primarily a symbol. The sword is a symbol of authority and of rank. The fact that they're not used in combat anymore was interesting to me, because in doing the research on this particular model, I found that there was available to officers who did not want to be burdened by a heavy sword. They could buy a sword, quote unquote, with this scabbard and this grip, but there was no blade. The grip, the hilt was attached to the scabbard. So obviously that was just something for show and not ever intended to be used. So this 1902 officer's sword belonged to a Cheyenne man named Edgar Herring. And we also have in the collection, and I've done a video on his 1911 semi-automatic handgun. So Edgar Herring was a member of the Missouri National Guard in 1916, when the National Guard from many states were mobilized to go to the border after some incursions into the United States by Mexican revolutionaries, most notably by Pancho Villa, who in early 1916 invaded the United States and basically burned down the town of Columbus, New Mexico. So Edgar was there for that border work in 1916. Based on his performance, he was offered the opportunity to attend officer candidate school, became a second lieutenant, served in France with the American Expeditionary Force during World War I, was wounded at least once, because we have some Purple Hearts in the collection that were awarded to him for his participation in that war. In 1927, he moved to Cheyenne. He was employed by the Burroughs Office Machine Corporation until he retired from them in 1957. But in 1941, after Pearl Harbor, he was 50 years old, and he volunteered for World War II and said to the Army, "Put me where you can use me. I'm willing to come in as a private." They made him a captain. He eventually was promoted to major and worked on 2 different stateside bases in charge of military police units. So Edgar Herring's sword, he's one of my, I use the term hero, I guess, lightly in this regard, but it seems to me here was a guy who put his life on the line 3 times for his country, and that makes him an exceptional person, in my opinion. So let's look at this other one. This has a cool story. And before we're finished with this series of videos, I'm going to talk a lot about the Spanish-American War and the subsequent United States military activities in the Philippines. So the United States in the Spanish-American War basically defeated Spain very quickly. Within 120 days, Spain was asking for peace negotiations. And subsequently, the United States acquired from Spain Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. So the war in the Philippines kicked off on May 1st of 1898 when Admiral Dewey stormed into Manila Harbor with his fleet and basically wiped out the Spanish fleet that was in Manila Harbor. So Wyoming had troops in the Philippines at that time. And when war was declared against Spain in April of 1898, President McKinley asked for 125,000 volunteers. Each state and territory was given a quota. So Wyoming established a volunteer cavalry regiment, a light artillery battery, and an infantry regiment. The cavalry never made it to Cuba because they were involved, the cavalry unit was involved in a train wreck at Tupelo, Mississippi, which killed 5 soldiers, delayed their arrival in Florida, and the war was over before they got reorganized and were disbanded. The artillery unit left Cheyenne, went to San Francisco for training, and arrived in the Philippines on December 6th of 1898. The Treaty of Paris was signed on December 10th, 1898. The artillery battery remained in the Philippines for the start of the Philippine-American War, which ran 1899 to 1902, and they were then returned to the States without really seeing any action in the Philippines. The infantry arrived in the Philippines in July. They were fired upon but didn't return fire. No one was killed in combat. In the total Spanish-American War, about 350 or 60 Americans were killed. That doesn't count the 260 that were killed when the Maine blew up in Havana Harbor. But there was like 6,500 Americans died of heat exhaustion and disease during the Spanish-American War, so not a good thing. Anyway, this is another Model 1902 officer's saber or sword, and this has the etched on it PC, which stands for the Philippine Constabulary. The Philippine Constabulary was a quasi-military police force that was established by the United States government during their occupation of the Philippines. It was composed primarily of indigenous Filipinos, officered, as is not uncommon in those instances, by white officers. So that Philippine Constabulary, obviously this sword was issued to one of them, and the Philippine Constabulary remained in place into the 1950s when it was incorporated eventually into the Philippine Army. So again, pretty neat sword. Nice etching on the blade, and a nice story in that it was issued to the Philippine Constabulary. So there you go. 1902 officers' swords, still carried in ceremonial and dress uniform occasions by the United States military officers. So thanks for watching.